Right, can everybody hear me all right? Morning everybody, and thank you for coming to the Understanding MS Fatigue and an Introduction to the FACETS programme that this session is. It's my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers for this morning. Oh, just a reminder about your phones for those that came in late. Can you make sure that they're on silent, please, or switched off? So I'm going to introduce Vicky and Alison. Vicky Slingsby and Alison Nock are both specialist occupational therapists from the Dorset MS service. They've worked for this service since it was set up over 10 years ago. They have a special interest in the areas of fatigue, vocation and cognition, and have been involved in the development of a group-based fatigue management programme known as the FACETS, which they're going to talk to us about this morning. I think Vicky's starting. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everyone. Can you all hear me? All mic'd up, so you should do. So thank you for coming to this seminar. We have to say that we never ever expected there to be quite as many of you as this, so we feel very honoured and obviously hope that we can deliver something that you're going to be interested in and want to hear. So the plan for the seminar is, first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about fatigue and understanding MS fatigue. We're then going to have a short sort of group interactive session just so we can try and listen to each other's ideas of what fatigue is going on in your own places of work. And then Ali is going to take over from me to introduce the FACETS fatigue management programme that we've developed. So it would be quite useful just to have a rough idea of who you are in the audience. And I just wondered if we can just have a raise of hands. Just first of all, how many of you are sort of quite new to the fatigue and fatigue management interventions? Do you want to just put hands up if you're quite new to all of that? Okay, so there's a few of you. And then how many of you are regularly carrying out sort of fatigue management interventions? Okay, so we've got quite an even mix. So hopefully we'll be able to cover within that remit that we've got here. So to build the picture of MS fatigue, we can look at some of the evidence and the facts supporting, why fatigue is such a big problem for people in MS. And how important it is for us to sort of help people in order to find the best ways of managing it. So we know that it's one of the most common symptoms in MS. We also can see from these percentages here that it's a really common problem, and people report it to be one of their most significant problems with these large numbers. We can also see that 50 to 60% of people consider fatigue to be one of their 3 most troubling symptoms. And this is really, I think, often in our experience because it is one of the most difficult symptoms to manage, which is why we're looking at it today. It's also one of the main causes of unemployment, and I'm sure that many of you will see lots of people with MS in the workplaces who are in this situation or have had to give up work because of MS fatigue. And certainly in Ali and I, in our field of work, we carry out a lot of visits to the workplace where people are at that point of risk of breakdown of work situation, work role, and often it's getting in there at the right time to give people just those simple strategies and advice about how to manage fatigue in that work role. We also know that there is no set pattern or correlation between fatigue and things like neurological impairment, between fatigue and neuropsychological performance, disease duration, disability, gender or age. And this makes it even more difficult for people with MS to understand because there isn't that correlation. And unlike some other symptoms of MS, fatigue has this invisible nature, which in itself can lead to lots of difficulties, as I'm sure you're aware, including misinterpretation from others, and difficulties in personal and work relationships. And that in itself can obviously have an impact on a person with MS and fatigue, their mood, their ability to cope. And of course it's going to have an impact on stress as well, and all these things we know can contribute to fatigue. I like this one. So we know fatigue is not obvious to others, so this invisible nature of fatigue is really difficult for people to manage. And you have that classic quote that I'm sure you hear people saying, "Oh, but you look so well," that it's not obvious, is it? And this can be really frustrating and difficult for people with MS to deal with. So as well as this invisible nature, we have lots of other challenges with fatigue. So the subjective nature of fatigue makes it hard to manage. It can be really hard to be objective about fatigue because it is so variable, not only in that individual, but between different people with MS. Fatigue varies hugely, and people's views and experiences of how fatigue affects them can differ greatly. We also have the roller coaster ride, which I think people with MS and fatigue will really relate to this because it is so unpredictable. There's lots of ups and downs, there's good days, bad days, so it is a bit like going on a sort of roller coaster ride. And then we have down in the bottom corner, we have this sort of overlapping, and this can be hard to make sense of fatigue because there's so much overlapping with not only fatigue but with other symptoms that can all sort of interlink and factors that can contribute to fatigue. And then we also have the fact that fatigue is so multifaceted. So there's a full range of dimensions and factors that all can coexist and interact and contribute to fatigue. So thinking about the subjective nature of fatigue, it can be really useful and quite insightful, I think, to look at some of these very real experiences and descriptions of MS fatigue. And these were quotes that actually we collated right in the very early stages of our FACETS research programme, which Ali will tell you more about later. And they were gained from a focus group situation, so they are very real experiences. So we have this one here that I like. It's, well, my family forget. I think they genuinely forget because I just walk into the house as I am. I haven't got a label on my head. They just forget all the time, and I just sit there and think, oh, I'm so tired. So people with MS will probably relate to that. And if you say you've got fatigue, they say, oh yeah, I get tired. So it really highlights that invisible nature that I've just talked about. And a few more quotes to explore the nature of fatigue. So this top one here looks at a sort of description of fatigue and how it affects them. But actually what people are sometimes saying is, I don't think you can describe it. You just can't describe fatigue. It's different every day. It's different for every part of your body. So it really explains the nature of the variability and the unpredictability of fatigue. And at the bottom here, I think I speak for everybody and say that we fight the problem every day. There is always a problem every day, isn't there? And I think this is quite powerful in giving the sense that actually a lot of people with fatigue feel that it is that battle. You know, you're having to fight against it. And that's hopefully where we can try and get involved to reduce that sense of it's a battle, I've got to fight it. This one here at the top really helps us to see how a person's experience with cognitive fatigue can also be affected. And this one describes how you start a sentence, and when you're very fatigued, you can't even remember how you were going to end it. And once end it, and then you can't remember how you actually started it. And then when it really kicks in, you just want to sit and do absolutely nothing. You don't want to think, you don't want to look at the television, you don't want to read, you just want to stare into space. So this hopefully will explain a bit of how fatigue can really stop people from being able to engage and participate in their activities. And rather like these quotes here that we've gained from our focus group, the booklet that we find really useful, the Living with Fatigue booklet, uses a lot of quotes and descriptions of people's experiences of fatigue, and it can be really helpful in helping people who perhaps don't see fatigue as a real symptom, are struggling to come to terms with it, to actually recognise that actually that is normal, that's what other people are experiencing as well. So to define fatigue, fatigue can be defined, this is taken from the Clinical Practice Guidelines 1998, but it's quite a good description of how fatigue does interfere. It talks about a subjective lack of physical and or mental energy that is perceived by the individual or caregiver to interfere with usual or desired activities. So as I said, this really conveys how fatigue is very, very different from normal tiredness, and actually fatigue interferes with the person to carry through those activities, and actually they're stopped from doing them, whereas with normal tiredness we can still push through. And another point to make in my experience, some people use a different terminology to explain fatigue, such as neurofatigue or nerve fatigue. I don't know if you've come across that before, but it can be quite helpful just to convey what this fatigue is and that it isn't the same as normal tiredness and normal fatigue. One more helpful quote, this one's from the MS Society chat rooms, looks at how fatigue can actually impact on other symptoms which we need to be aware of. It is much more than just being overly tired. It causes me to feel weak, lightheaded and nauseous. It affects my eyesight and causes my speech to slur, and I find it impossible to concentrate on whatever I was doing. This can happen to me many times in a day, and it is a lot worse if I become warm. So we can see how fatigue can actually exacerbate other symptoms that people might experience in MS, and as well as that heat sensitive part that many people also experience. So what are the causes of fatigue? We can start to explore this. This is what we call a conceptual model of fatigue management, and it's taken from the MS Council. So it shows really that the causes of fatigue are quite complicated, and there are a range of dimensions that coexist and interact with each other. So we've obviously got your fatigue in the middle here. We know that MS causes fatigue, both primary and secondary. And then we've also got all these other factors that we know can contribute to fatigue, such as other physical health conditions, sleep disorders, normal fatigue that we all experience, and psychological health is a really important factor to consider, including things like anxiety, stress, and depression. And finally, the environment. So the environment we know has a part to play, has a role to play in impacting on that person's fatigue. So looking a bit more closely at MS fatigue, so we can categorise MS fatigue into primary and secondary fatigue. Some of you will be familiar with this, but hopefully we can refresh any ideas that are not quite there. So primary fatigue is categorised into 4 main categories. And primary fatigue is actually the fatigue that's caused as a direct result of damage or inflammation to the myelin in the central nervous system. And the body responds to this damage by slowing down reactions and thus causing fatigue. And we also know that primary fatigue may be a result of the brain having to adapt to MS by finding alternative pathways, a bit like a car trying to find an alternative route when it's being faced in a traffic jam. So primary fatigue is divided into 4 categories, as I said. So the first one is lassitude, and the top left picture hopefully depicts that to you. So when we talk about lassitude, we're talking about this sort of overwhelming sense of exhaustion, and often totally out of proportion or not related to participation in activity or exercise. So people might describe that they feel this sort of overwhelming exhaustion, fatigue, but actually they haven't really done that much, or it's feeling that they've maybe just walked up a mountain when actually they've just been quite quiet at home. We also have short-circuiting fatigue, that's our sort of circuity thing down in the corner there. And this relates to fatigue that can sometimes come on relatively rapidly during sustained or continuous activity. And it occurs in small muscle groups during repetitive movement. So a really good example that we usually give is a walking example. And often people might describe that when they're walking along after a short period, they might notice that their foot's dropping or legs dragging, that sort of scenario. And actually after a short rest, those symptoms can return to normal. And this is actually due to reduced efficiency of neural transmission. So through that repetitive action, the neural transmission is reduced. And this occurs because of a build-up of sodium ions during that continuous repetitive movement. And it's thought to cause a conduction block, so the messages aren't getting through. And then just with that short rest, it allows those cell membranes to return to normal. So that's short-circuiting fatigue. And actually all these things are really important just to explain to your patients, because actually once they have an understanding of it, it makes the whole sort of stress response to the situation much better, because they can understand what's actually happening and know how to deal with it. We then have the heat-sensitive fatigue. So sometimes symptoms can temporarily worsen during exposure to heat. For example, things like a hot bath, humid weather, a hot spicy meal, anything that exposes or increases that core body temperature just by a very small amount. And this can result in reduced nerve conduction, and therefore the messages aren't getting through, so things are not working so well. So the important message is obviously trying to reduce that exposure to heat or keep cool. And then we have cognitive fatigue. So we're thinking about people's ability to remember and to concentrate and to learn new information. And sometimes when people are fatigued with MS, this can be difficult. So this is something that some people experience. Sorry. So then moving on to secondary fatigue, so you can guess some of these as I speak through them. We tried to make it really visual because lots of words is always too much, isn't it? So the secondary factors are often things that may be unrelated to the MS, but isolating these contributing factors is really, really important and really invaluable in our role as looking at fatigue management, because many of these secondary factors perhaps could be avoided or even treated directly. So it's really important to establish some of these likely causes at the beginning of any fatigue management intervention. So just to go through some of these briefly, so things like sleep, for instance, we all need good quality sleep to be able to feel refreshed, don't we? And with people with MS, a lot of people do have some problems with sleep, and that might be getting to sleep, it might be staying asleep, getting the right sort of quality of sleep, and obviously people frequently waking in the night. And sometimes it might be due to other symptoms. So again, it's looking at this because it might be things that could be helped. For example, problems with bladder, with pain, with spasticity, depression. So these are all areas that we can isolate and look at specifically. Another secondary factor is mood and depression. And we know that there is an increased rate of depression in MS. And even just for people dealing with fatigue, it's likely to impact on their mood. And so you can get a bit of a vicious cycle, really, with low mood depression resulting in fatigue, and fatigue resulting in low mood depression. So again, it's exploring what options are available. Then we've got pain, the back pain there. So any pain is going to use up valuable energy. So it's really important to, again, isolate, what that pain might be, what's causing it, and obviously referring to any appropriate people to manage that pain, because that could save some of that person's energy. Then we've got the pulling the hair out scenario, and that's this anxiety stress situation, which both anxiety and stress can be really draining on energy reserves. And again, there's another vicious cycle going on here with just dealing with fatigue is really stressful, and it can be quite emotionally draining as well, and therefore that can contribute to fatigue and so on, that vicious cycle going around. We also need to think about nutrition. So it's common sense, isn't it? I mean, a good, healthy, balanced diet is what we need. And certainly with MS and fatigue, food is fuel. So it's important to get that well-balanced diet. And there's lots of good advice out there already, with all the publications that the MS Society and MS Trust put together, so we can utilise those. Then we've also got infections to think about. I mean, we get so many people calling up, certainly on our helpline, with worsening fatigue, and actually once you get right down to the bottom of what's happening, often it is something like an infection that's caused that exacerbation of fatigue and symptoms. So again, it's really important to pick up early on any of those signs and symptoms and get them treated appropriately so that the fatigue is going to be less of an issue. Likewise, medications. We know that a lot of medications have side effects of drowsiness, so always worth bearing that in mind, when you've got somebody with MS and fatigue, just exploring about, whether that is the right medication, or liaising with GPs and consultants to see if there's something else that would be better for them. Then down in the bottom corner here, we've got the issue of deconditioning. So sometimes, many of our patients with MS and fatigue, may become less active over time. And this is what we call deconditioning. So, and obviously with deconditioning, what's happening is the cardiovascular system, the muscles, are gradually becoming out of use. And therefore, that's going to result in less efficient use of energy when they are used, and therefore more fatigue. So it's really important, again, as part of our fatigue management intervention, that we're educating on the importance of exercise in a balanced way, and obviously liaising with our colleagues and physios for advice in that area. Then we've got other medical conditions. So there are lots of other medical conditions that likewise can cause fatigue. So again, it's just ruling out those, and if there's anything else that can be used to manage those more effectively, to link in with GPs and neurologists accordingly. And then finally, we've got the environment. And when we're talking about the environment, it really is everything and anything. So thinking about things like lighting, temperature, stairs, distances. There's so many things to be thinking about in terms of the environment and what impact that might be having on that person's fatigue. So, what do we do about all these things? How do we manage it? So, from our point of view, when fatigue is identified as a sort of major limiting barrier to that person's ability to carry out their day-to-day activities or fulfill their goals, then that would be when a referral would come through to us from usually our MS nurse colleagues or physio or neurologist. So when we're talking about fatigue management, we're looking at a means of facilitating coping behaviours. And this is through a variety of means, so including education, and that's both fatigue management principles as well as practical problem solving, which can aim to address fatigue. And fatigue management is very much a coordinated approach, and it involves participation of obviously not only the person with MS, but also those people around them. So friends, family, work colleagues, whoever is involved in usual day-to-day activities with that person, they all need to be engaged in that process of fatigue management. And I rather like this definition actually that was from Harrison in 2007, but it really outlines all of the approaches that we're talking about when we're referring to fatigue management. So it talks about a process by which the individual increases understanding, so that's what we're aiming for that person to achieve, of the factors which contribute to and exacerbate her fatigue. So a really good understanding of what that fatigue is for that individual. And then through education and adaptation, she can learn to optimise functions. That's our goal really, isn't it? Within the context of fatigue through goal setting and the use of energy conservation techniques. And you've probably seen this pattern before, but it's just to highlight to you, isn't it, the classic scenario that we see really in many of our patients with MS and fatigue. It's really typical for people to experience this boom and bust type pattern. And it's a bit of a yo-yoing pattern that actually, you know, over time, and you can see the line coming down here, what happens over time with this pattern is that there is a decreasing overall level of activity. And actually, in the long run, it often results in enforced rest, where the person actually can't really do very much at all. So each day you can see with this boom and bust pattern, going back to that quote at the beginning when people described it as, I have to fight it every day, you can see how it is a battle really if this is the pattern that person is following. So these are some of the energy effectiveness techniques that may be used, and looking through at them, I mean, they're not rocket science, are they, when you look at those? But actually managing fatigue is a really, really big challenge for a lot of people, because actually we're talking about changes to the way of living, their usual ways of living. And there can be many barriers that can get in the way of this, and our biggest challenge really is to facilitate people's ability to take ownership of that change. So just going through some of those, we're talking about taking frequent rests. Many of you will know that the idea is to take short, frequent rests before that fatigue sets in, and that's really important to try and break that boom and bust type pattern. And also it's looking at, well, what rest is, because a lot of people will have their own perceptions of what rest is. We know some people say, oh no, I do have a rest. I sit and have my cup of tea and watch the telly. And actually when you start to look at what really effective rest is, we really want to be encouraging people to do nothing at all during that rest. Or sometimes things like relaxation exercises can be helpful to really get an effective rest. We're also looking at prioritising activities. So it's useful for people to actually look at what they do and look at, well, how could I do some of these things differently? What's really important? What's enjoyable? What could be done by somebody else? What could be delegated well and truly to somebody else? And actually, are there some things that don't need to be done at all? So that's a really important part of looking at being more energy efficient. Also, we've got planning ahead. So spreading things out. Sometimes people find that a schedule can be quite helpful. And a rule that we often talk about with our clients is time, not task, which I like. We tend to do an activity or a task until it's finished, I think most people, that's the way we tend to do things. So it's trying to change that around rather than completing the task, actually breaking that task into allocated times. So you still complete the task, but in a much more energy efficient way. Then we talk about organising tools, materials and work area. So that's really looking at making sure that there's not excessive effort going into some of those day-to-day activities and getting individuals to ask themselves, actually, am I doing this in the most efficient way? Because we all do things in certain ways just because the way we've always done them, and it's not until you really look at things that you might realise that that person is using a lot of energy to do it. And this particularly in our roles, it might be looking at sort of kitchen activities, looking at equipment that might enable somebody to do kitchen activities more effectively without reaching and bending and lifting and twisting. Also in the workplace, certainly just a workstation setup can be much better ergonomically set up to allow better use of energy. We also look at posture. We know that if the posture's not good, if someone's displaying a poor posture, they're going to be using a lot more energy to maintain it because of lots of compensation going on. So the encouragement of good posture and good support and changing of positions is really important too. And then finally, healthy lifestyle and exercise. I've already mentioned exercise and the importance of that, and also healthy lifestyle, and it's that well-balanced diet that we're looking at. So putting these principles into practice, as I said, it looks quite straightforward, common sense, some of those principles, but the hard part is putting it into practice because there are many barriers. So things that can be helpful to put some of these strategies into practice, for instance, a daily, weekly record, maybe in the form of a fatigue diary, can be really helpful. We use a lot of those and there's a lot out there that you can sort of access. And this can be a really helpful tool to discover sort of patterns of fatigue, and everybody's different, which is why the diary is so unique to that individual. It can also be helpful to look at what are the triggers to that person's fatigue, what brings that fatigue on, are there any patterns, and also what reduces it, so what can be helpful. It's important to identify a baseline to work from, and the diary can be really helpful for this, just to work out, well, where is this person at with their fatigue management, and from that they can perhaps look at identifying some goals to work towards. It's also really important to get that right attitude for change. Positive self-talk and acceptance is important to make changes. And sometimes it's that individual is having to maybe challenge some of those unhelpful attitudes, thinking or ways of doing things that they already do in order to make the best use of their energy. And that can be really difficult for people, and it can take quite a long time as well. Sometimes I think our approach is very much a drip sort of feeding approach, and until that person is at that point where they're ready to take things on board. And finally, we've got support and communication. That's really invaluable to put some of these fatigue strategies into practice, because with positive reinforcement from family, friends, colleagues, and this coordinated approach that we're talking about, this is going to help changes to be put into action. So just from what we've covered already, I mean, you can really see that fatigue management, it has to be a self-management approach, and it has to allow people to take greater control over their condition on a day-to-day basis. So that's really the aim of fatigue management, and it's very much self-management. We also understand, and there's evidence to support, that self-management programs can be specifically designed to reduce the severity of symptoms and improve confidence, resourcefulness and self-efficacy. And this is kind of where our FACETS program came from, which obviously Ali will tell you a bit more, and it does prove quite clearly that it helps in those areas, definitely. So it's also about energy effectiveness. And when we're talking about energy effectiveness, we're talking about a therapeutic approach to planning activities and finding more efficient ways of doing them. It's also about achieving a balance between activity and rest, which is a central feature. I mean, that's really important to try and get that balance. And it's also about modifying the environment. So we've given you some information really about fatigue, and hopefully you're sort of starting to get a bit of an understanding of what fatigue is and how it affects people and what some of the causes are. And as we're at this sort of conference, which I think is a fantastic opportunity for networking and sharing of ideas, these are some of the things that, you know, are quite interesting to know about with fatigue. Things like what interventions are carried out in your practice, because there's loads of excellent stuff going on out there already. And there's loads of tools and resources that are available to all of us. So it would be good to sort of look at what's being used, and also just comparing group versus individual. So I don't know what you all do, but, you know, we do a bit of both, and obviously it varies depending on individual need, but it's useful to explore that. Also to look at what resources are used, because as I said, there's lots out there, and we can share all of that knowledge and expertise, and perhaps any evaluation or outcomes that you might be using in your fatigue management intervention. So just have a bit of a break from talking. We thought it might be quite nice. I mean, we never expected to have this many people, and we had thought about feeding back and things, but actually I don't think that's really going to be realistic. But I think it would be good just to have 10 minutes or so of chatting, not with people you know, because the idea is to try and get some ideas from other people, but just use these questions as a guide, because it is about fatigue management, and we can really use this time really well to sort of learn from each other. So over to you, just for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll call you back when Ali will start to introduce the FACETS programme. And if you need to move around to find other people to talk to, then please do that. Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, your 10 minutes is up. Stop. Well, there was certainly lots of discussion, and I'm sure it was all around fatigue. I'm sure. I trust you all. So hopefully you have learnt lots from each other. And we've just been talking down here as well, and it's good to know what's going on in different services and just pick each other's brains as well as to what's going to work in your area. If there are any issues that come up, we will, I promise, I will stop in time for questions at the end. But I think if we do it now, we might run out of time. So forgive me on that one. We really weren't expecting this number, so we did think it would be a bit more interactive, so apologies for that. So FACETS. We're going to talk to you about FACETS programme. And this is what FACETS stands for, just in case you wanted to know. So it's fatigue, applying cognitive, behavioural and energy effectiveness techniques to lifestyle. And believe you me, it took a long time to come up with a name for the programme. It was just called the Fatigue Management Programme. And we obviously needed to give it some identity, and yes, it took an awful long time. And as that's quite wordy, it's just called FACETS. Okay. So the FACETS programme has come out of a research project. And these next two slides outline the research team and some of the contributors. And just to give you a little bit of background as to how it came about, Professor Peter Thomas, who's at the top of the slide there, and he's from Bournemouth University, from the research team there, and Dr. Charles Hillier, the neurologist from Poole, in charge of the MS service. They were actually involved in a Cochrane review many years back now, can't remember which year it was, and it was looking at psychological approaches within neurology. And really the evidence that they came up was quite sparse. So the feeling was that we needed to be gathering more evidence, and fatigue came out of that. And Vicky and I, being the OTs within the team dealing with fatigue pretty much on a day-to-day basis, were approached to do just a small pilot study to develop this programme. And we went, yeah, that doesn't sound too bad. We'll get involved in that. And all these years later, here we are. So it's been great. It's been a wonderful experience, and I do recommend research to people as long as you've got a really good research team behind you. They did all the scary bits and we did the nice bits. And these are some of the other contributors as well, because we joined up with Southampton and Bristol, and one intervention in Portsmouth as well. So why did we choose fatigue? So as you know, drug treatments, they do work, but for some and not for all. And it's very variable, isn't it? We know we've been doing energy effectiveness for many years, and we know that they do benefit individuals. But the research really is pointing that there's some moderate benefit, but it tends to be in the shorter term because old habits start to come back in again. There is some evidence around cognitive behaviour therapy, and that has been shown in the chronic fatigue services and also within rheumatoid arthritis. So that was a bit of a starting block for us. So from that, we decided that our programme was going to blend the cognitive behavioural and the energy effectiveness approaches together. So going to marry those two together. We wanted it to be a self-management type approach, so that is the way to go. And we also wanted it to be delivered in groups, because groups, we'll talk about that sort of briefly later, but groups have got their own benefits, haven't they? Because it was a research, it had to be manualised, but I think that's one of the big strengths of the programme, is that you have a manual which has got all your sessions in it, and it actually talks you through what you need to be teaching. But obviously from a research point of view, we needed to be giving the same messages. We wanted it to be delivered by people who are already working within MS services locally. So your OTs, your physios, your nurses, etc. In some places they do have psychology. And we wanted it to be easy to roll out within sort of current practice. We didn't want it to be this research that would then sort of sat on the shelf at the end of it because it was too difficult to deliver. So there's been 5 phases. So Vicky and I agreeing to phase 1. It's kind of gone right down to sort of the 5th phase now, sort of the rolling out of the FACETS. And the development of the programme I think that probably took sort of the bulk of the work initially. We tried it out in pool and sort of did lots and lots of tweaking. And then we tried it out, as I said, in Southampton and Bristol and pool again, just to see whether we were getting similar effects. And that was funded by the MS Trust and Bupa. And then we put another research bid in for phase 4, which was the randomised control trial, which I'll talk about in a moment. And that was being funded by the MS Society. So really, really grateful for the support that we've got, and the MS Society are funding the rollout as well. So Vicky's already brought some slides out about this, but we thought there's no harm in sort of feeding you it twice. But the theoretical underpinnings of the FACETS programme, there's self-management, self-efficacy, energy effectiveness, and cognitive behavioural. I apologise, some of the letters have jumped around. But anyway, no, it's fine. No, don't worry about it. Should be in a line. Okay. So this is the one that Vicky showed you before, so I'm not going to go through it again, but I think it's just worth, we talk about these terms quite often, don't we? And sometimes we mean different things. So I think it's good to sort of spell it out as to what we are really sort of meaning by some of this terminology. So self-efficacy is a person's confidence in their ability to accomplish a task or cope with a challenging situation. So this is a quote from the research. So before I used to battle with it being the fatigue, convinced that I could beat it. But since taking this course, I've realised that perhaps I can't beat it, I can manage it. So that's your self-efficacy. And your energy effectiveness approaches as well. That's really underpinning a lot of the programme. And you know, we often say a lot of the things that you think you're saying are common sense, don't you? But they're only common sense because you know them. And it is definitely worth sort of sharing that. And within the group setting as well, there's an awful lot of sharing on these types of things. Right, cognitive behavioural approach. So that's concerned with an individual's attitudes and ways of thinking. So that's your cognitive bit. What they do is their behaviour. And it's based on the theory that your cognitions, emotions, and your behaviours, they interact in sort of positive and negative directions. And sometimes by changing the way that, changing how we think about a situation, it can actually influence how we feel and then what we do about it. So that's your cognitive behavioural, which the programme is based on. And this is the visual model that we use within the FACETS programme to kind of explain and make that clear. Just so it kind of makes sense and how to break them down into the different areas. So cognitive behavioural approach, the strengths are that it is a structured approach. It's not sort of too airy-fairy. There is some structure to it, some model to follow. It's about working in partnership. So we are not the professional prescribing, telling the person what to do. You're working together to find some solutions. So very much a problem-solving approach. And it's really about helping people to gain insight into how they actually think, how they feel and behave, because we just go on and do things, and it's about taking a step back sometimes to kind of look at those different areas, break it down for themselves. And then in that way, people can explore other ways of thinking. Is there more helpful ways of thinking when it comes to managing fatigue? Are there different ways of behaving? Can I do things in a different way that might be more helpful to managing fatigue? So it's very much cognitive behaviour approach in terms of managing your energy effectively. So the objectives of FACETS. So it's about normalising the experience of fatigue and actually just bringing people into a room together in a group situation where perhaps they've never met anyone else with MS before. They might have never have talked properly about their fatigue because somebody said, oh, but I get tired as well, or but you look so well. That can just in itself start to normalise that the fatigue is real and other people experience it as well. Another big objective is about exploring how to use your energy more effectively, the available energy that you've got. And then also from the cognitive behavioural bit, it's about developing helpful thinking styles about fatigue. So So what does the FACETS look like? So it's 6 week sessions, and generally we hold them weekly. Although we have on occasions done 3 sessions, had a half term in between, and 3 sessions afterwards, but they need to be sort of quite close together. And actually the feedback from that was people quite like to consolidate what they'd learned for 3 weeks and have a little bit of a break, think about it, and then come back and do three more. We recommend 2 facilitators for the group rather than sort of being a lone worker. I do appreciate that it might be quite difficult in certain areas, but that would be what we would recommend. And we would ask really that if people are going to be running the FACETS programme, that obviously they've got experience of MS and MS fatigue, that they have some experience at some stage of running groups, and that they have an awareness of cognitive behavioural approaches. It is very much approaches. We're not doing the full-blown CBT, but you just need to have some understanding of sort of thinking styles and changing thinking. It's a closed group, and we recommend, again, sort of 8 to 10 participants within the group. And the sessions build upon each other, hence why it's a closed group. It's not sort of modules that they come in and sort of learn about. We carry on from the homework each session. And the group runs for roughly about 1 hour and 3/4 with a refreshment break in the middle, apart from the first session where we invite significant others to come along with them, and this session's slightly longer, just because it's a bit of getting to know you. So the resources, so if you are wanting to run a FACETS group, there is a training which I'll talk about at the end, but these are the resources that you would be provided with. So you have a facilitator's manual which basically talks you through each session. You get a set of PowerPoint slides which would be emailed to you that you just press and click each week. It's all there for you. You get workbooks for each session as well that you'd give out to the participants, so a bit of a summary of what they've learned in the session. And you get all your handouts and relevant signposting to relevant resources. So it's all there for you. So just briefly going through an overview of what's in each session. So the first session is very much about describing the different types of fatigue, a bit like Vicky did this morning, and some of those pictures are the ones that we use within the group setting. And it's about normalising that experience of fatigue at that stage. And homework is every week, and we start off with the biggest amount of homework, which is an activity diary and an energy measure, which we'll then use in subsequent sessions. Session 2, we start to sort of give them some analogies and pictures to build upon, some different ideas around sort of budgeting, rest, sleep, activity. So they start to sort of think about the approaches of energy effectiveness. And some homework around the themes of sort of rest and activity and sleep. Session 3 is looking at all the different component parts of an activity to get people to kind of recognise where their energy is going. We often think about energy in terms of just physical, don't we? And as we know, there are the other elements as well. You've got the cognitive and the environment and the social as well. So we sort of introduce that idea. And we introduce an idea of having a toolbox approach to managing your activities. So things like pacing and planning and grading, prioritising. We kind of describe them as tools that they can dip in and out of and use where appropriate. And we introduce the idea of goal setting there as well, and we use SMART goals, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and they take on a task of goal setting in that one. Then it's the stress management, starts off in session 4. So what is stress? How does the body respond to that? Different ways of coping with stress. And at that point, we formally introduce the cognitive behavioural approach to them using that sort of model that we showed you earlier. But right from week 1, we're already starting to break all their feedback on the flip chart will be broken into those component parts. So we're sort of starting to prepare them for this formal model. And homework is a bit more difficult, starting to get into the thinking side in terms of fatigue, and we introduce them to the thought diary. at that stage. But they do generally get it. And I should also say that we tend to use sort of hypothetical situation scenarios within the group to test out all these different things before they're then set off to do their own homework. So hopefully it kind of makes sense to them. Session 5 is about introducing them to all the different types of unhelpful thinking styles that all of us have from time to time, and about helping them to challenge them. Is there's some way that we can make this more helpful in terms of managing the fatigue, and again sort of explain a little bit more detail about the concepts of core beliefs and where those come from. And then the most difficult bit is the thoughts challenge diary. When you come on the training, we will go through that a little bit more detail. And the last session is quite a fun session. It's about pulling everything together, and we use bingo in that session to try and sort of get them to try and remember all the different things that we've taught to them, and we do it in a bit of a game style, which goes down quite well, rather than sort of dryly talking through everything. And we talk about setbacks and sort of planning for them, and goals for the future, kind of about keeping on track. So that's the sort of flow, if you like, of the 6 sessions. So I'm sure, you know, you're doing very similar things within yours. So just some reflections and things that we have learnt before I go through the actual research bit itself. So we tend to do our FACETS group as morning sessions, and that came out of our focus group as part of the research. And it has worked. Even people who are at work were able to write a letter to the employer if that's needed. But most employers have been very willing to send people along if they felt it was going to help that individual within the workplace. It's just really important to kind of think about your timings, you know, avoiding drop-off at school and all those types of things, and rush of traffic. Venue's really important. I think it's just worth bearing in mind. You know, we sometimes go for the free, which is in the hospital, and it's impossible to park. You're squashed into a room. There's lots of setup. So if there is any way that you can have it outside of the hospital setting, we actually have it in a hotel. Got a really good deal through a local hotel. It's lovely. It feels much more sort of normal and inviting. So just think about your venue and access and all those types of things. It is a closed group, and we do encourage that people are able to attend all sessions before they sign up for it. Obviously, if somebody is ill, then that's a different matter, but we will send out the material. We do expect them to commit fully to the programme. Maximum of 10 people, that seems to work quite well. Sort of in a group setting, there's enough time for sharing within that. And just the funding issue as well. I guess that's slightly around the venue and the setup of a group. The MS Society, who are part of the rollout of this, said, you know, if anyone has got any problems with that, just come and have a chat with them. The local branches may well be able to offer some funding. So don't make that the thing that stops you from doing it. So a quote from one of our group members sort of quite recently, which we've put together. So it was good to hear real issues face to face and have time and permission to talk about the whole complex business of MS in a safe and caring environment. The group helped me feel relaxed and confident to speak about anything. This lady herself had steered away from groups and found online forums rather depressing, which probably went on at the wrong time. She felt that the group was actually a really positive experience. So we generally have some really good feedback. We've had the occasional that perhaps they've come to the group and maybe not a group person, or maybe it's just been a little bit too early for them to perhaps sort of hear and share other people's experiences. So it's really need to think about who's going to be right for your groups. It needs to be the right time. So the research itself, you may well have already read about it. We've done sort of various papers now, but the FACETS trial design was a pragmatic parallel arm, multi-centre randomised control trial. It doesn't roll off the tongue, does it at all? And what that meant was that we ran the FACETS programme, so the 6-week programme, alongside current local practice within those 3 centres that I outlined earlier, and we compared it with what would be the normal current local practice. So that's was the project. The primary aims were about, does FACETS improve fatigue severity, self-efficacy and quality of life, the MS-specific quality of life. And the secondary factors, because we thought, we've got this opportunity to collect lots of data. It was, does FACETS improve fatigue impact? Does it improve people's mood, general quality of life? And does it change how they do things, their activity patterns? Really important one, is it cost effective? That's what commissioners want to know, isn't it? How much is it going to cost? And also wanted to collect some qualitative data. And I think this has still been written up, Vicky, not had. It's the hardest bit is the qualitative, isn't it? There is so much. What do you put in, what do you keep out? So that's in the process of being written up at the moment. So what are the participants' experiences? What changes have they made as individuals? What barriers to change have they encountered? And what's been the sort of helpful and the unhelpful aspects? So a lot of information was being gathered from there. Eligibility, I'm not going to go through that specifically, apart from to say it was designed for people who were up and walking. They may use a wheelchair for sort of longer distances, and that was fine. But we just felt it would get too complicated if you've got too much of a mix within a certain group. Vicky and I did say that we would do then a sort of tweaking for wheelchairs, and we haven't, because I think we got fatigued out. So if anybody was interested in adapting what we've already done and doing some research for wheelchair users, that would be wonderful. We keep saying that and nobody yet has volunteered, but you might be someone here today. So outcomes. The outcomes were hitting all those areas from our aims. So obviously we had fatigue outcomes, we had self-efficacy, we had mood, and we had quality of life measures. And we also had active PALs, which were measures which measured when somebody was moving about, standing, sitting, lying. So that was part of it as well. Okay, and just a slide to give you some information on the numbers that were involved and how they were randomised. But yeah, there's a pretty equal spread, but I'm not going to go through all of that. It will be on the slides that you get through as your handouts. Okay, and just a slide about the demographics as well, just to show you that we had a good sort of mix, a good spread of ages, types of MS, the determined disease steps, and also the year since diagnosis. So there was quite a good measure that we were collecting data from as well. Are you able to see that all right? Okay, and then the results themselves, we've included on this slide the 12 months results. So originally we'd done it the 1 in 4 months that we'd written up, but then we've gone back and done a 12-month review. And that was really positive, which is great, because that would have just been soul destroying, wouldn't it? But at 12 months, there's still been some good effects, which is a real selling point, isn't it? So the fatigue self-efficacy improved at 1 month, but it's sort of gone on for 4 months and at 12 months as well. There was that feeling of control. There was a decrease in the fatigue global severity scale. That wasn't noticed till 4 months, but that was maintained again at 12 months as well. And the quality of life, that took a little bit longer, because it takes a while, doesn't it, to sort of start to make some changes and notice those changes. And again, that showed very good effects then later on at 12 months. So we're really pleased with that. And secondary outcomes as well, the significant ones are on the left there, and that was the vitality. And that was noted at 4 months, and the fatigue symptom inventory as well, average fatigue and current fatigue. So, and then they're not significant. There were some changes, but not statistically significant on the other side there. Okay, so it just gives you an idea of what measures we were using and the ones that showed effect. I'm always really interested, being a therapist, I guess, in this sort of thing. So what were people finding useful as strategies that they were taking on board to make those changes in their life? So it's quite encouraging to see what are those sort of main messages that were taken on board. So you've got prioritisation there and pacing. Pacing, yes. That's usually the really difficult one to convince people, isn't it? Saying no, grading, the challenging, unhelpful thoughts. So all the things that we were covering in the group have been rated as a graph in here. There's a little bit of extra information. Sorry, physios, the exercise is near at the bottom. But we did try. For those of you who are involved with commissioners and trying to persuade them on sort of different treatments, this is the economic evaluation. I have to put my hands up and say, this is not my area. This is, thankfully, we had lots of people involved, a statistician and social economist and the research team. So I can read this slide, but please do not ask me many questions about it. There's probably somebody else in this room that can explain it more. But it does work out the cost of the FACETS programme per person. I get that bit, that's fine. But it's recognising that 50% of that cost will be the cost of the facilitators running the group. Vicky and I were band 7, so we were more expensive perhaps than if you had a different sort of mix of bands as well. So you know, that 453, generally each centre they were band 7s because we were involved in the research and we would just happen to be the ones around. Also, depends on whether you've got to pay for the venue that you're going to run the groups in. That will bring the cost down as well. So that's sort of a maximum cost, if you like. So if you need to sell it a bit more, you can break it down a little bit further as well. And they've also, for any commissioners who need the sort of qualities worked out for them as well, there is some information that you can use in presenting that to them. There's sort of uncertainty around the cost effectiveness, and I guess because it was a pragmatic trial as well, we had all sorts of scenarios going on. Vicky and I would do one-to-one intervention, but some of the other centres would literally just pop an information booklet on fatigue out in the post. So, you know, it was quite difficult to get all that information. But it is it's inexpensive, shall we say. So conclusions then around the FACETS programme. So it's got small to medium effect sizes. By 1 month follow-up, there was an improvement in self-efficacy. By 4 months follow-up, there was a reduction in fatigue severity. And by 12 months follow-up, there was an improvement in quality of life. As I said, it's an inexpensive, in the scheme of things, it's an inexpensive treatment. And also it has been designed, hopefully, that people can be up and running and using it locally. So just an update, just of interest as well, that the FACETS programme, there was some interest in Paris. Some of the research team got to go to Paris. We didn't, did we? They came to ours. We got out for a meal though, didn't we? So that was quite nice. So it's been translated into French now. They're doing their own research on it and they're actually doing some follow-on review sessions. They've added it in. We didn't do it as part of our research. In some ways we wish we had now. Vicky and I will do a sort of coffee catch-up with people maybe 6 or 8 weeks after the group, but they're doing it more sort of formally in France. In France, occupational therapy is, and I presume physio as well, is quite different. It looks a bit different, so we had sort of lots of discussion as well about how it would translate over there as a programme, but they tend to use more psychologists to be running it. So it'll be interesting to get some more feedback from them. And then, yeah, when we did a training session in Scotland, we had a couple of Norwegian therapists come over and they've now translated it into Norwegian and they're doing some research on it. And they've adapted it because in Norway, people go to therapy centres for a month to do intensive therapy. So they've sort of put some sessions together within that, and we've been part of helping them to find a direction in doing that as well, and it's been translated into German. So it's all very exciting. But as I said, Vicky and I, we managed to do the UK stuff, but not anything else. Not that we're bitter in any way. I think New Zealand were interested as well, but that's gone a bit quiet, hasn't it? And as I said earlier, the 1-year follow-up paper has been published. I think that was in, I can't remember when it was. It was reasonably recently, wasn't it? July or August time. So that's out there as well, which is good to be seeing them going through. Okay, so as I said, it's been 5 phases. So we're on the roll-out phase now. And this next slide will show that. So the MS Society are supporting the roll-out of it. You can tell it's MS Society because it's very orange. Didn't start off like that at all, but we're very, very grateful for their support in it. So they have put together the manuals from the research and sort of helped us develop that. And they provide all the materials for this programme to be rolled out. And they also fund the training courses. So what we're asking is that for people who feel that they would want to and are able to run the FACETS programme locally, then we're happy to sort of train people on the specifics of the course. So the MS Society will organise days around the country. Those figures actually, it says we've trained 123. 2 weeks ago we were in London and trained another 24, and we're in Glasgow in 2 weeks' time. So the numbers sort of keep being added to. And in February we're in Dublin and Cork. So if anybody's around, come along and get onto it. But Rona from the MS Society is a person to speak to. She is here today, or obviously just go on their website, and if anybody's interested in doing that, then we are asking that people attend the training, because we want it to be run as it was meant to be run, rather than, I was as guilty as anybody, you kind of pick bits out that you quite fancy, don't you? And then it's not evidence-based, is it? And if we really need to be promoting that, don't we? So yeah, come along. We obviously appreciate that we're asking for 2 facilitators, so we're not asking for everybody in the team that comes along unless they want to. As long as one person from that team, we're more than happy to roll out all the materials that people need, all right? So we're not being precious about it, and we're just trying to hopefully go about it in the right way. I must say again, when we agreed to do the rollout, Vicky and I thought, be a few people, a couple of sessions, and it will be covered, so, but it has kind of gone on. But that's lovely, really pleased with that. I think we're there. Okay, so we've got a fair bit of time for questions, so we'll hand over to the chair who will control that.
Are we using the microphone for questions? Can I just quickly say thank you to both Vicky and Ali for that. That was a really informative talk. So. I think from my point of view, it's just nice to kind of go over what we're doing in our services and sort of reinforce that we're all sort of doing the same thing. So I'll open it out to questions from anybody.
Thank you. I just wondered, as part of the programme, within that, are you actually collecting more outcome measures? So does that make part of the programme? Because if you're rolling this out, that's a huge opportunity to actually collate more information about the efficacy of the whole programme.
At Poole we're not collecting anymore, because that we had the pilot study, then we had the randomised control trial. We kind of felt that we've collected the evidence to get our statistically significant data. So at Poole we're not. We're tending to just have an evaluation of that actual intervention with the patients that come along. But having lots of discussions with people on the training days, other areas feel that they need to collect the data for themselves for a bit and to prove that it's working in their area. But we're not at Poole.
We've had discussions earlier about this, and in our service we've had somebody recently trained to do the FACETS, and we were discussing about outcomes, and we've decided that we'll probably continue to do the measures that we currently do while we roll out the FACETS, just so we've got some local data, but hopefully eventually we'll be able to stop using that because we can use the evidence that's there. Okay.
Hi, I'm an OT. I run the FACETS down in Herne Bay. It's been really popular. We're on to our 5th group now, I think, which the highest number 10, which is quite challenging. And certainly if people aren't able to come to every session due to being unwell, work commitments, things like that. So I've actually had to do a high number of one-to-one visits. Is there any way, I did discuss with Rona potentially about some other ways to adapt that?
All we
just
would
wondering.
do, if somebody wasn't coming to the group, we'd send them out the information, and then we'd offer a telephone consultation. So we'd expect them to have read it through and then have a conversation with us about it. So we're not offering one-to-ones for any sessions they've missed.
Right. That's helpful.
I just wondered if there was a central database so we know where the courses are being run.
Yeah, on the
And
MS
who?
Society
Society.
website. Yeah, they're doing it all. And how they're sort of responding is people will go to them and say, we want one in a certain area. We'd love it all to be in Bournemouth. We wouldn't have to travel. But I think there might be, somebody's asked for one in the Midlands at some stage. That might be the next one that's organised. So if there's enough people in one area that people are happy to travel to, then Vicky and I will travel to you to do that. So just, speak to the MS Society.
Any other questions? Did anybody want to give any feedback from the discussion that you had in the sort of middle session about what you're doing in your services?
Even in terms of what outcomes people are using, that sort of thing, it might be worth sharing.
We've had very good outcomes. We use the Modified Fatigue Impact Scale, and everyone, bar two, one who was recently diagnosed with depression and somebody who fractured their foot, everyone's fatigue had decreased following the 6 weeks and at 3-month review as well. What we found, which was really good, and helped with Rona as well from the MS Society, in regards to people with visual impairments, certainly some cognitive difficulties in remembering the homework and things like that, to be able to provide the audio.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which has been really lovely, and lots of feedback from people. A lady with a visual impairment who came to the first session without it, struggled because of the need to be dependent on her family to fill out the homework book, to then being independent. She's a glutton for punishment, she's come back to do it, but then to be able to use the audio dictaphones, she now can do it independently, has a much richer understanding how to manage her fatigue, and I think she's got so much more out of it now. So
Great, forgot about the audio bit.
Yeah, so
I always forget that bit, don't I, Rona?
No, so it's been really good, thank you.
Yeah, oh, I know, excellent.
Can I just ask how much the physios were involved in the education part? Did you have physios involved?
What, in terms of
In the teaching?
In developing the programme?
No, in the actual delivery of the programme.
There were some physios at some of the other centres as part of the research. Yeah, I think Bristol and South. Did Southampton, Rhoda, you might remember? No. Definitely Bristol had a physio who was delivering the programme, and possibly at Southampton as well.
Okay.
We've had lots of physios at the training sessions, which is good. And nurses and OTs. Lots of OTs.
I was just going to say, I run the FACETS programme at the MS Centre, the Chilterns MS Centre. Just finished our 5th group with some
and
really
you've come
good
to hear
effects.
about it again.
Well, I got some questions.
Okay.
One, I was just interested in how you select people for the group, because I get lots and lots of referrals for people with fatigue. Obviously, some of those aren't really appropriate for a group setting. I might see them on a one-to-one basis. I just wondered whether you do sort of an individual assessment prior to inviting them to the group.
We're really fortunate because we are an MDT team, and there's usually somebody in the team that will know that person. So we'll go and speak to them and say, we've had this referral, and it's generally come through the team anyway. Are they suitable for a group, or is it better that it's a one-to-one? So we're able to just ask our other group members. But I know in other areas they might have to do sort of an interview and a meeting before they get allocated to the group. Because it's really important, isn't it, to have the right people?
Yeah. One thing that I was saying in our discussion as well, that a lot of people that come to the group, regardless of the information we're giving them, it just gives them the opportunity to take a step away from their busy life and just evaluate what they're doing. And often they come up with their own answers just by having that time to reflect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is really
Stepping
valuable.
back, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what sort of environment do you run your groups in?
I run it at the centre, so
Yeah.
we're very lucky to have a newly built MS therapy centre, so we've got a nice big room to use with an interactive whiteboard, so it's ideal. Yeah, I'm very lucky. One thing in terms of saving costs that I've learnt during running the groups is that the participant workbook that I was originally printing off for everybody, which ultimately is about 120 pages, isn't it?
Yeah.
The last few groups, I've spoken to them and said it's going to cost us quite a bit of money. Are you happy for me to email it to you? So each week I send out an email with that attachment.
Yes.
And they can print it off for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. So there's lots of different
that's a
ways
good way
to
of
save.
saving
We started
costs.
doing that a bit more, but yeah, it took us a while to catch on.
Yeah.
Because we were
Yeah.
doing it for research, and it's all paid for, isn't it? And yeah, you get used to that.
It's little things like that.
But
just
yeah,
to
technology
save.
can really be helpful,
Yeah.
can't it? Really. Wonderful.
Sorry, can I just ask how long the course is?
So a 6-week course.
No, the course, the training.
Oh, sorry, the training course. I beg your pardon. It's just a day.
A day.
Yeah, it's just a day. Yeah. There's a lot to fit into a day. It's a bit of one of those days, but yeah. It does start at 9 o'clock in the morning, yes. But we finish early-ish, don't we? And it's always on a Friday because it's Vicky and I's day off, so it's not ideal, is it?
Or not. Yeah.
Or not, yeah.
Any other questions? No? Okay, then we'll finish there. Thanks
Thank
again
you.
to
Enjoy your
Vicky
coffee.
and Ali. A couple of things before you leave. Just to say that it's refreshments now being served in the exhibition zones 1, 2 and 3. Please take the time to visit the exhibition stands and the posters. The next seminar starts at 11:15, and just look for the signage for which rooms they're in, or ask a member of the Med Events team. And just to note that due to capacity, they've had to make a change to the seminar rooms published in the abstract book. So the non-medical nurse prescribing session with Nikki Embry and Nicola Carey is now in the Avon here, and the session on personal health budgets with Debbie Quinn and Jill is in the Stratford. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.